Welcome to the Maya Animation Walk Cycle Training Kit. The series of lessons that we have in this training kit are going to teach you more than just a walk cycle. We're going to teach you some MEL scripting for animators. We're going to teach you how to add follow through and weight to your characters. We're also going to teach you what to look for as far as dissecting a walk cycle. Then we have some bonus lessons set aside to translating your character in your workspace, as well as how to convert this male walk cycle into a female walk cycle. We have a lot of great information for you in this training kit. You'll have to watch it a couple times to get all of it absorbed. Without any further ado, let's get our environment set up for animating. In this first lesson, I'm going to break it up into two parts. The first part is setting up our environment for animation, and in particular this walk cycle. And the second part of this lesson is going to be writing a MEL script to make the process of setting keyframes a little bit easier, especially when you get the hang of how to use the script and how to use the tools in Maya. Okay, first off, let's go ahead and set some preferences here in our scene. You probably have got like 100 frames, but we're going to work with whole number frames. So we'll start with 1, 1 on this side, and we're going to go to 25 frames total. Now, the reason we're using 25 frames is we want an odd number because the first frame and the 25th frame are going to be exactly the same. So we'll knock that last frame off. That way, when the cycle happens, there's no hiccup. And then in the middle, we're left with an odd number frame, which is perfect. That's what we want. So let's take a look here at some of our preferences. We'll go up to Window, Settings and Preferences, and let's take a look at our settings here. I've got it set to NTSC 30 frames per second. I'm going to change that to film, which is 24 frames per second. Okay, we'll work with that. That way we end up with 1 second of animation. Okay, I want to go down to the next tab, which is animation, and I want to change this from linear to clamped. Now, usually we go back and flatten the in and out tangents, but not always. So by default, we want them clamped, and we'll go from there, so to speak. And let's go down here to timeline. I'm going to set this playback speed to play every frame and not real time, because real time is going to be 1 second. It's going to whiz right by. But play every frame, we're going to see if there's any little hiccups inside of our animation. Okay? So once you have all those set, you just hit save. And you're good to go. We're ready to start keying this little guy. His little nickname is Animo, and he has a very similar rig to the character setup. He does have a couple of extra features like the toe pivot and heel pivot, which you can get on our website for free. And other than that, he's pretty much the same rig. He does not have an advanced hip that the Alexia rig does. So there's a couple nice features here, but you should be able to rig your own character. This is a .ma file, so if you have an older version of Maya, you should be able to convert this file pretty easily. Otherwise, you can easily follow our character setup kit and build the rigs for your particular characters. All right, now I want to devote the second half of this lesson to writing a MEL script. If you're not a big fan of MEL or do not like to program, you're more than welcome to skip ahead to the next lesson where I'll show you how to set this script that we create into place. That way you don't have to sit through a programming lesson. However, I challenge you as an animator or an aspiring animator, somebody who's brushing up on their skills, to really sit down and write this MEL script. It's a simple 5 or 6 line MEL script, and it'll show you, if you've never written a MEL script, where things go, how you load them, how you plug them into your shelf or hotkey editor, and that way it just makes life a little bit easier when you're working on your own projects, on building little scripts to help ease the process of making things go a little bit faster. All right, so I'm going to open up Edit Plus. All right, and you can use Notepad, WordPad. You can use pretty much any kind of text editor that you want. I wouldn't recommend using Word because it's going to add extra characters that you don't need. All right, Couple quick starting points. If we use 2 forward slashes like this is a comment. It will not be compiled by the compiler when it runs this code. Maya will not look at anything after those 2 slashes. So I can just put in here select and the objects. Okay, and it will not evaluate this line of code. Okay, it'll just ignore it. All right, next we need to set a variable to find out which objects in our scene are selected. So we'll go in here and we'll type in string, which is a variable type. Okay, and now we type in the name of the variable, so it's a $sign. We'll say my objects. Okay, and then open and close bracket. Now, the open and close bracket tell the system that this is an array variable type. Okay, so we're declaring it right off the bat that it's an array. Now we say equals, and now we're going to run a command. So this is going to be the single tick above the tab key. Okay, looks like this. Do not confuse it with the single quote, which looks like this. Okay, so the tick there, and it's going to be ls is the command for list, and then a flag, which is indicated by a dash, sl, which is selected. So list the selected objects. Okay, and a semicolon ends that line. So the system says, okay, I've read this line and I'm at the end of the line. Next, we need to find out which attributes in the channel box are selected. So I'll type in string. I'm going to have another variable. Okay, I'm going to say my adder, so my attributes. Open and close bracket, since it's going to be an array. And what the array means is there may be more than one object or more than one attribute selected. So we want to get them all and store them in one variable. Okay, so we'll say equals, and the command, again, we're going to run a command, so we use a single tick, is going to be channel, capital B for box, okay, and the flag is going to be query for Q. The second part of this flag is going to be -SMA, which tells the system, find out the selected main attributes. Which attributes on the top part of the channel box are being selected. All right, so that's kind of a nice little command. Now, we want to find out which channel box we're talking about. And you have to be very careful here, because if you have another mail script which is another channel box floating or in a kind of a custom user interface, you want to make sure you get the correct name of whichever channel box you're talking about. So the name of the main channel box inside of Maya, which is what most people are going to be using, is just main, and then capital C, and then capital B for box. Now, be aware that that's all one word. Okay, and we're going to end it with a semicolon, the tick and the semicolon. All right, so now that we've selected the objects, we've selected the attributes, what in the world do we do? Well, we're going to create 2 loops. One, to find out all of the objects that we have selected, and then for each of the objects selected, we're going to set a keyframe for each of their attributes we have selected. So it's kind of 2 loops. We'll find out what's selected, and then of the objects that are selected, run through each of the attributes that are selected. So it's a kind of a double for loop. Now, we'll create one loop, and then we'll make another loop on the outside of it. So I think it's a little bit easier to understand. Okay, so I'll put in a couple comments here that say start the loops. Okay, and this is how you create a loop. We're going to say for, and then parentheses, a new variable. Now, what's neat is you don't have to declare this variable, which is kind of cool. So we'll say my node adder, okay, my node attribute, and we're going to type in the word in. So for every node, every attribute in the variable my adder, which is right here. Okay, so what it's saying is if I have, let's say, translate X, Y, and Z selected, it's going to run through here and say, okay, translate Z is in here, translate Y is in here, and translate X is in here. Run the command until I run out of attributes, okay, which is kind of nice. All right, we'll close this with the parentheses, and now we're going to add a squiggly bracket, and I always hit enter, enter, and close the squiggly bracket. It's always a good idea that if you open a bracket, to go ahead and close the bracket. Okay. Now, the command for all of this to work is set keyframe. So set capital K frame, okay, keyframe one word, and we're going to say, okay, some object in here is going to be keyframed. Now, we don't know what that object is yet, but we'll get that figured out in just 1 second. Okay, so now we're going to create a loop on the outside of this. So if you want, you can kind of tap things over a little bit. Just makes things a little bit easier to see. All right, I'm going to make my second loop, so I'll say for, and then $, parentheses, $, my node. Again, this is a made-up variable. This is not a variable in Maya. It's just some variable. $, I could say my stuff, whatever. So for every object, which is this variable right here, so every object inside of this selection, right? So we'll say $ my objects. Remember, squiggly, come down here and close the squiggly. So at the end, you're going to end up with 2. Normally, when people tell me, hey, my script didn't work, it's usually because the 2 squiggly brackets were not included. Okay, so you've got that set. And now we need to put the meat of this script together. So it's going to be, okay, we want to set a keyframe. On what? Well, we need to give it an object name. Okay, and I'll just type it down here in a comment. Object name, a period, attribute name. Okay, so it would be something like, this would be, an equivalent to that would be ball dot translate X. So ball translate X is the attribute. This is the format that we need to set the keyframe in. Okay. Well, to do that, all we have to do is format our statement up here correctly. So we'll say my node, okay, which is right here. Keyframe the object my node, and we need a period here. So we'll come in here and say, okay, no problem. We can just add a period. We'll say plus, quotes, period, quotes. Okay, so it adds a period. We'll say plus, and then the attribute. So we'll say my node adder. Okay, I'll just get rid of some of these extra spaces. You can have spaces if you want. It's not a big deal. All right, let's go ahead and select all of this, copy it, and let's take it into Maya and test this out. All right, I'm going to just create a sphere and move it out here. Okay, we'll just frame in on that just so we can test this script out. And let me paste my script in. Okay, select all. And the way we can add this to our shelf is easy. You just come in here and middle click, drag and drop it to your shelf. Now watch what happens. If I have Translate Z selected, hit the button, there you go. Now in the next lesson, I'm going to walk you through again how to put this on your shelf, how to add it to a shortcut key, and how to change the shelf button. So it'll be a real simple lesson. It'll be for the ones who skipped over the programming lesson. So, and then in lesson 3, we'll get started on our walk cycle. All right, this is going to be part 2 of setting up that Mel script that we just written to help us keyframe our selected attributes in our channel box. Now, if you wrote this Mel script, great. Make sure it runs just like we did at the end of the lesson. If you haven't written the Mel script, you can grab it from the Maya data folder. It's in the Mel script folder, and you should be able to open it in Notepad or anything. You can even open it in the channel box or in the script editor in Maya and load that up, copy it, and then I'll show you what to do with it. All right, so we can open this up in Edit Plus here, and I've got Edit Plus. You can open it up in Notepad, whichever you prefer. Okay, just if you wrote it, great. If you want to learn more about Mel, we have dedicated Mel training kits that can teach you how to build more complex user interfaces and things like that. All right, let's go ahead and open up our script editor. I'll paste this, Control V, Control A, and click and drag this up to my shelf. Okay. So with that done, let's go ahead and change this icon here, or shelf button. We'll go down to the shelf editor, And right here under label and tooltips, let's change this to key selected atters. All right, and we got an image for you that you can load up, and this will be in the My Data folder. Okay, so it looks like a little mini channel box. It's got a little selection, and it says key selected. We'll go ahead and save the shelves there, and let's just create a couple of objects. Okay, I'll create a sphere. Let me move that forward a little bit. We'll just say 60 in Z, and let me create a cube. And move that out here. Okay, and I'll just frame those in. This is just for testing to make sure that the script is working. All right. So let's see if we can get this guy to set some keyframes. So we'll push this up in the air. Okay. So this is our translate Y. We have the translate Y selected. We have two objects selected. We'll hit the button, and you'll notice it does turn orange. It did set a keyframe for each one of those. Okay. And I'll move forward in time, let's say 10 frames, move it down, hit the button, and we should have animation. And oops, I didn't have anything selected over here, so we'll just move this down, hit the button, there we go. So you need to have at least one attribute selected. Now it will work on multiple attributes, so if I select all three of those, hit the button, it will key all three. Okay, let me undo that. So we've got some nice work here. Now, let's add one more key at frame 20, but let's do it with a shortcut. Let me teach you how to add some custom code to a custom shortcut. So we'll go over here to Window, Settings and Preferences, Hotkeys. And let's find out if a hotkey is available. Now, S is a pretty traditional hotkey. It's never changed. It's to set a keyframe. Let's query it. It's set key on all of your channel attributes. So we know S, okay, it's always there. But what about if we add Control? Well, we know Control S is save the scene. How about Control Alt S? Well, that has nothing assigned to it. So that's perfect. Let's create a brand new command. So we'll say new. Okay, let's give this a name. Key adder. Okay, no spaces. Now the description, we can add spaces. That's okay. So we'll say key all selected attributes. Okay. Category, I'll set this to animate category. And then I'm just going to paste my command in. Now, you can't just hit save at this point. You have to hit accept. Okay, perfect. And then you'll notice that it's highlighted here under your commands, under the animate folder. And then all you have to do is hit assign. And that's it. It's now connected. It's assigned. We hit save. It has saved. We hit close. Now, I've got some animation of it up, down. I'm going to set these guys back up. Okay, we'll select Translate Y, and my shortcut key is going to be Control Alt S. Now, I've got up, down, and back up. So there we very quickly made ourselves a channel box, a shelf button, a hotkey. If you want, you can make yourself a marking menu to set these keyframes, however you prefer. I like to either work with the shortcut key or the shelf. I will start off the lessons by doing a right-click key selected, just so you are very familiar with where it is and how we're doing it. But then as we get deeper into the lessons, I'm going to move towards the shortcuts just because it's a little bit faster and we can move through the content a little bit quicker and spend more time talking about why we're doing things as opposed to how to keep keying the same thing over and over and over. So hopefully you're now set up, squared away. You can delete these two objects. Like I said, they were just for testing. And we're going to get started in the next lesson setting our first sets of keyframes on our character. Now we're going to get into actually animating and setting some keyframes for our character. Now we're going to work from the bottom of the character up. We'll start with the hips, get them in the right position, and then we'll concentrate on the feet until we're totally happy with them. Then we'll work our way up to the back, the head, the arms, and the wrists at the end. Let me show you a quick diagram. This is kind of the walk cycle diagram that we're going to be using as kind of our reference or a cheat sheet. Okay, as you see here, we've got everything broken down by frame numbers. We're going to be doing a simple 25 frame walk cycle, something that every animator should know how to do. We're going to be working with 3 frame increments. And let me explain this diagram. We're going to start off with a contact position where both feet are making contact with the ground. That's going to be on frame 1 and 25. Okay, now there's also going to be a contact position at frame 13, which is halfway between these two. Okay, and at that point the legs are shifted, they're reversed. So in this instance, the character's right foot is forward. Here the left foot is forward, and then it will go back to the right foot, and that way we'll cycle back and forth. So we're going to set initially in this lesson these 3 keyframes: 1, 25, and 13. And I'll show you how to get those set in. Then we're going to start breaking this down into halves again. So then we'll look at it at frame 7 and frame 19, which is halfway between 1 and 13 and 25 and 13. Okay, so that will be our passing positions. We'll also then break it down again into between 1 and 7 will be 4, and between let's see here, 13 and 19 will be 16. That'll be our down position, which will be the lowest point of our character. And then 10 and 22, which will be the peak point, which will be the highest position for our character. Now, this illustration right here is the line of action. Okay, and essentially our hips, when we look at the graph, will have a very similar curve when we're done. And again, this is just half, so it would come here and then start back over, and that would be 1 cycle. So it's going to be really exciting. We've got a lot of stuff to cover. The first thing that we're going to do is actually position our character in the right spots here. Now, I'm going to be using pretty much whole numbers. That's just so they're easy to remember. Keep in mind that if on frame 1 we have this foot moved forward, let's say 40 units, on frame 13 it would be moved back 40 units or negative 40 units. Okay, so we're going to be using reciprocal values back and forth. On the arms, if you rotate this arm, let's say 60 degrees, then this arm will need to be rotated negative 60 degrees because it's the mirror side of this character. So a couple things to keep in mind as we're working. Again, we're going to work with the hips and the feet first and just establish our contact positions. All right. I do want 25 frames, so let me just go ahead and set this to 25 frames. Set this to 1. Okay, so everything should be nice and even, 1, 1, 25, 25. Nothing out of the ordinary or extremely fancy. I do want to set the character set, so we'll go to Character, Set Current Character Set to Animo, which is our main character, and I'm going to hit S to set a keyframe. Okay, so essentially all of the pieces are going to get a keyframe established for them. I'm also going to turn on auto key. And, you know, I always preach, don't use auto key, don't use auto key. But in this instance, since we're going to do a lot of keyframing and we're going to do it explicitly, go ahead and turn on auto keyframing. If you're not comfortable with auto key, then you're more than welcome to use the shortcut key that we created earlier, or you could, again, right-click and key selected. All right, I'm going to work with frame 1 first, because then we'll just go over to frame 25 and set a key for all of our character set pieces at the very end. So again, we'll hit S to make sure everything is keyed. I see a result of 126 keyframes established. No problem. We'll go back and kill all the keys that we're not using later on. All right, let's go ahead and move these knee controls forward. And I have values that I'm going to be using, values that I've kind of predetermined, but we're not going to stick with those 100%. What I want to do is show you kind of how to train your eye to look for the correct position of these elements and where things should be. Okay, so I will, you know, pick something up and kind of move it into position until I find that I like it in that position, and then I'll usually round it off or put in the value that I feel is the correct value. Okay, so for instance, this center of gravity or main body control here, I'm going to set this to -3. Okay, again, a whole number. I'm going to try to stick with complete whole numbers throughout this whole training kit just to make it easier for you to see how these pieces are related to each other. All right, and since we're going to have the right foot go forward, I'm going to grab this little hip bone that we have, the hip sway control. All right, and I want to go ahead and rotate it in Y. So let me just get this, rotate Y. And I want to move that hip forward, so around 19. Okay. So that's good. Let's go ahead. We're only going to concern ourselves with the side view first. Okay. It's really important that we establish a good side view profile before we start getting into the hip swaying down and dipping in the head and things like that. All right, so we established our center of gravity, our hip sway. Okay, we've got everything the way we want it. Now let's get these feet in the correct position. So I'll start with my right foot. All right. And I'm going to move this guy out a little bit, so I'll just move him forward. And what I know this is beyond where its movement can be, but I'm going to lift the foot up, so his foot will be rolled back. So he's getting ready to take the next step. This is its contact position. All right, so let's see. Translate Z. I want that a little bit more. Okay, we're going to go a little bit extreme. So let's say something like 24. And you'll see when I plug this number in and you take a look, that is pretty high. Okay. However, by the time I put in the next attribute, which is the toe heel or the raise heel, okay, watch. Crank that in. Okay, let's try 31. You can see that it has good, clean contact with the floor. Okay, so if your character is of different proportions, experiment. What you're looking for is this straight leg, heel touching the ground, ready to take the next step. All right, let's go ahead and move this foot backwards. So I'm going to pull this back, excuse me, to about negative 28-ish around there. Okay, and you can see that I'm not really getting any knee bend. That's okay. I'm going to get that when I raise this next two pieces, which is going to be the raise the ball control, ball raise control. Okay, let me just crank that up. There we go. See how that plants the ball of the foot nicely. Okay, and I'm looking for a good amount of bend without overextending. Okay, so we'll stick to 30. Okay, and then we're going to raise the toe. There we go. Now we're starting to get that nice bend. Okay, right around there. Okay, and I'll just round that down, 15. Okay. So there is our first position. Okay, and let me bring up that image again. And as you can see here, we've got a nice straight leg, heel contact, ready to take that next step. And back here we've got this contact where it's ready to push off and launch the body forward to take the next step. Okay, we're pretty happy with that. All right, so now that we have frame 1 completed, let's drag over to frame 25, and I'm going to hit S, and that should keyframe everything for us. Okay, so now number 1 and number 25 are all matching beautifully. Okay. So what I need to do now is concentrate on frame 13, which is going to be the reverse of this. Now, the easiest thing to fix, first of all, is to put in our hip sway. So we know right now it's 19. Let's switch that over to negative 19. There we go. Okay, so that was a nice fix, or easy fix. And now what I want to do is I want to switch these legs back. Okay, I want to switch their positions. So a couple of things that I need to remember are where these values are. So right now my right foot is at 24 and my left is at negative 28. So pretty easy, I can fix that. I'll just put this to 24 and this to negative 28. Now, of course, all my other stuff is all messed up, so let's see what those values were. We're looking at raised ball and raised toe at 30 and 15, okay? And over here, it's negative 30. So let's just set this to 30, 15, and 0. Okay, there's our contact. And then over on this foot, our left foot, these were both 0, but this one was negative, I believe, 30. I can double check that just by going to frame 1 and selecting this other one. Oh, it was negative 31. So let's go back to frame 13 and type in negative 31. Okay, so as you can see, we just switched everything. Okay, it went from having the right foot forward to having the left foot forward. Okay, and here's what our animation looks like so far. Now, nothing fancy yet. Let's hit play and just play this back. Okay, nothing fancy, but this is the framework of our future keyframes and animation. Now, before I move on to the next lesson, where we start working again with more of the hips, we're going to take a look at our graph first. Okay, I've got the Animo character selected, since nothing is selected in my scene. Okay, I'm going to open up the character set here, which has 4 character sets inside, and I'm just going to select them all, frame the selected, and you should have only 3 sets of keyframes, which is what we have. And what I need to do is go over here to Curves, Pre-Infinity Cycle, Curves, Post-Infinity Cycle, and then View, Show Infinity, or View Infinity. Okay, this is going to be helpful when we start working with our curves and adjusting our curves themselves. We're not going to do that quite yet because there's still some tweaking that we want to do. But once we get some of our other keyframes established, we're going to want to make sure that our View Infinity, both pre and post, is activated so we can see these curves. All right. Next, we'll again refine the foot movement and move on to the next position. Now we're going to go 3 frames into the animation and talk about the down position. So in this down position, you can see the foot is flat. Okay, the right foot is flat, and the left foot is now lifting up, and really just the toes, or just under the area of the toes, are kind of grazing the ground, getting ready to lift up and move over into the passing position. So we're going to work on frame 4 and 16 next. Now we need to go ahead and establish and make sure that we've got good keyframes. So I think, let me just take a look at this hip here. Okay, actually this hip control. I don't have a keyframe for frame 13. Okay, we never set a keyframe for that midpoint. We did set a keyframe on these feet, okay, but not anything else. And since this is such an important frame here, I'm going to go ahead and hit S on my keyboard to set a keyframe for everything. So I'll deselect my character, hit S, and oops, my character set isn't selected, so let me set my character set as Animo, and I'll hit S. All right, there we go. So now I do have a keyframe on frame 13 of everything locked in here. Okay. Now the reason I needed to do that is because at frame 4, if we look at our image, our hips are down, and they're not at they're not touching the ground, but they are at the lowest point out of our whole line of action here. So it's going to dip down and slowly raise back up. So let's get that action put in, and then we can evaluate what we've got. So let's go ahead and dip this down a little bit. Something visible, okay. I'll just stick with -5. So I have a keyframe here on -4. It dips down, goes back up, and then 3 frames later, I need it to dip down again. And I like -5, so we'll stick with that. Okay, so we've got this. Dip, back up, dip, back up. Very good. Now there's 2 more frames that we're going to put in, 7 and 10. So there's still a lot more action that's going to happen in the hips area. But as far as moving down in the down position, we've got that set now. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. All right, next we're going to work on the feet. And let's go ahead and start with the right foot. We know from our picture that there is no raised part of the foot. Okay, it's all locked down. So it moves to this position. Okay, and then frame 16, this foot would be locked down. Okay, so we'll go ahead and lock down this foot. All right, so see what this looks like. Okay, looking pretty good. So at frame 4, let's now tweak this back foot or this left foot a little bit. I'm going to zero everything out, and I'm going to move this guy back a little bit in Z. And what I want to do is lift his foot to where it's just on the toe here. Okay, it's really extended. I'm going to round this down, -34. Okay, and at this point, let's add some raised toe. Okay, and I'm going to add quite a bit of raised toe, because what I want to do is match that picture where the knee is forward, the toe is lifted. About 102, I think, looks pretty good. Okay, a lot is happening here. Okay, so let's take a look at what this looks like. We've got this movement here, lift up, touch. Okay, and now I'm going to need to do the same on frame 16. Okay, so this one here, I'm going to move back to -34. Okay, I remember those numbers. Okay, all these are zeroed out. And my raised toe was 102, I believe. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. Step, step, touch. Okay, very good. Now, if I take a look, frame 4, if I look from the side view and I snap to 16, this left foot is quite a bit more forward. Okay, so let me actually just jump straight to a side view here. If I look, see that forward? We're going to fix that next, and that's going to require starting to delve into the graph editor. Now, we're going to use the graph editor a whole bunch in this training kit, so it's something that you're just going to have to kind of get used to and start to get yourself familiar with. So let's open up a preset view here. I have the perspective and graph editor button here, so I'll just click that once. Okay, and let's take a look. I have the right foot selected. Okay, and for some reason it turned off all of my view infinities, so that's not good. Let's go ahead and just get this Animo character selected. Let me get all of the sub characters here, and let me just turn this back on. I think view infinity. There we go. All right. So let's talk about go back to frame 4 here. What we want to do is mix the graph a little bit. Let's see. Translate Z is what we want to look for. We'll hit F to frame this. Okay. So what we'd like to do is have this graph, this part of the curve, linear. Okay, so we want it to come straight in and then ease out. Okay, so we'll select this first keyframe and we'll click this button right here, which is linear tangents. Okay, and then this key, if I make it linear, it's going to break both sides, and we don't want to do that. So I'll undo that. Instead, what we'll do is we'll select that keyframe right here, and I'm going to hit this button, which is break tangents. Now I can select just the left side of the graph, as you can see here, and set this to linear. Okay, so this is going to ensure that coming into this graph, it is nice and straight. Okay, it comes in, goes back up, and at this point here, I want to flatten the tangent, so I'll just hit flatten. So it's going to come in and back up. So now let's take a look at this, the left foot. Okay, translate Z. We'll go ahead and hit F to frame the curve, and let's see what we got here. What I want is this curve to be linear, this keyframe, and I'm going to break this top tangent, and I want this half to be linear. Okay. And then lastly, I'll just go ahead and adjust, let me see if I can select it here, adjust the tangency here, okay, just by middle clicking and dragging. So I'll make a nice smooth line that goes from the line coming in right out, and it's very smooth going out. Okay, so let's see what this gives us now. If I go back to my side view and I snap to 16, I'm getting a very familiar looking result. Okay, my 4 and 16 look identical except for the hip movement. So let's play this animation back. Let me go back to my perspective view here, and let's hit play. All right, this is really starting to come together. I'm starting to see that this character has weight. This character has movement to him, life to him, and you know, we still have 2 more big poses that we want to put in. Now, this type of animation is called pose-to-pose animation, very popular form of animation, and as you can see, we can get a lot of work done very quickly. And we haven't really even delved into the whole editing the keys in the graph editor. So once we get into that, you'll see it really does come to life really well, really quickly. So let's break here, and in the next lesson, we'll work on the next pose. Now we're really starting to make some headway. We're going to work on the passing position of our walk cycle next. Now the passing position, the hips go back up, but the key thing that I want you to be aware of is this locked leg. Okay, the heel is off the ground, the toes are planted, and now the foot that was in the back is taking the forward position now. It's in front of the foot that was originally in front. We call this the passing position. This is going to be the next 3 frames, which is going to be 7. And then 3 frames from 16, which is going to be 19. All right, so let's take a look at what we have here. Excuse me. All right, we got this movement going here. It's pretty nice. All right, so let's go ahead and go to frame 7 and analyze this position here. Now, I don't want to move the hips quite yet until I get the foot planted exactly the way I want it. So let's see. We really don't want no values for anything first. Let's just see what we have going here. Okay. All right, I want to zero that out. I want to zero the ball raise. I want to zero that for now. Okay. All right, let's analyze this. We need to get the hips up in the air, so let's work on that first. Let's go ahead and pull the hips up. And again, we want to use the hips to drive that heel a little bit. So let's get that up to about 1.2. I think that looked right. There we go. And now with our hips up, we can add a little bit of that ball raise. So just a little bit, just so our toes sticks to the ground a little bit. Okay, about 0.6. Let's try that. There we go. Again, it's sticky to the ground. Nice straight leg. Okay, what can we do with this foot? Well, I need to get it up off the ground, and I don't want to lift it up too high. Okay, so I'm just going to select our translate Y and take it up just a bit, just enough so it gives the illusion that it's lifting up off the ground. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have. We'll go with this. Nice. Okay, it's now moving forward in front of the other foot. Okay, we got some nice movement going here. Now, we may want to go back and add some movement of the foot actually passing, but I like the way the knee looks in this position, so let's just stick with this for now. All right, we want to switch values over on 19, so we can do it all by scratch, or we can just middle click on frame 19, and let's see, we changed the translate Y of this foot, so we'll go ahead and put in a -6 there. Okay, and this foot was a 0, so we'll go ahead and put in a 0 there. And our raised ball was, let's take a look here, was 6, so we're going to 0 that out. And on this character, or in this, it's going to be 6, and the rest were 0'd out. Okay, so let me click once. All right, and we also need to move our hips up. So if you remember, I believe it was 1.2 is what we used. Okay, let's just double check. We do have -6. All right, we zeroed everything out, and we zeroed all of those. So let's go ahead and zero these as well. Okay, so these get all zeroed out. And I just need to make sure that we had a key on our hip there. Yep, -5. So frame 16 had a key of -5. We need to make sure that that's negative. That's right. -5. So, yeah, that's good. Okay, so frame 19, that's looking pretty good. Now, our foot does need to go up in the air, and we could, let me just double check this. Oh, I've got that as -6. I think it should be 0.6. There we go. It's a little bit too much. Okay. Raise ball. Let's see, 6. There we go. All right, so let's just double check our settings here. This is our right foot. Okay, and so at frame 19, we want, let's see, 6. I'm going to go ahead and put the raise ball to 6 as well. Okay. That just seems like a little too much. I'm going to 0 that. Let's see what we looks like here. Plant, step. Okay, that looks good. Plant, step. I just don't feel like this hip is moving high enough in this frame. And so I need to make sure that we don't have any translate Y. That looks good. Let's go ahead and take a look at the graph of this hip here. Okay, I'll have the hip selected. We're going to look at the translate Y. Go ahead and frame that. And as you can see, if I look at frame 19 and frame 17, my values are off a little bit. Okay, and there is why. I've got a negative value here, so actually it needs to be 1.2. There we go. And that looks a lot better. So anytime, you know, train your eye to look for something that it just doesn't, if it doesn't look right, train your eye to find out why it doesn't look right. Okay, same thing with this Y of this foot here. You notice that 0.6, and then on frame 19, that 0.6. So we know those look good. Okay, let's take a look at frame 7 here. Okay, we just want to double check all of our values and make sure that all of our values are matching up. Okay, so let's take a look here. We're looking at 73.9 and -8. And we're not matching up here. So let's go ahead and reset these. So 73.9, I think. There we go. And my memory is so bad. I have to make notes for all this. -8. So we'll go ahead and put in this value here of -8. And that's just going to ensure that our left and right foot are moving correctly. So let's take a look. Let's take a look. That looks good. All right, let's take a look from our side view. Very nice. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that now. It looks very nice. Everything is symmetrical. And again, you know, your character doesn't have to have symmetrical movements and totally be always, you know, symmetrical and always, you know, robotic. But what I'm trying to do is teach you the mechanics and trying to train your eye of if something doesn't look right, why doesn't it look right? As you can see there when we had the hips, you know, the knee was bent. Well, why was the knee bent? Well, let's go investigate. And you can easily see that one was higher than the other. So now we'll talk about the peak position next, which is frame 10, which will set in 10 and 22. This will set our major movements and poses in, so then we can go in and start to refine this movement and refine kind of how this whole animation looks. The last major pose we have is the peak position, and this is really easy to do. We just lift the hips in the air and everything gets getting taken care of. But what we want to do is spend the rest of the lesson, once we get the peak position put in, tweaking our graph curves. We're going to be breaking some tangents. We want to add weight to our character, so things are going to, you know, slam into the ground, bounce back up, and add a little bit of that weight and follow through. All right, so let's concentrate on frames 10 and 22. Let's take a look at our picture here. This is going to be our peak point. Hips are at the highest position. Pretty much the feet will take care of themselves. The foot's already passed. It's now ready to make the next contact. So let's get started here. I do have the center of gravity node selected, and I'm going to raise it up. So just take my translate Y, and I want it to go pretty high. So let's just say 2. Okay, as you can see, the leg is straight-legged. If I went a little bit less, I'm not really on the tip of my toe, and I don't like that. So we'll leave it at 2. And middle click on frame 22 with translate Y selected. You can, again, right-click, or you can hit our little button that we made. And let's take a look at this. We've got the hips down, going up to the highest point, back down, up, back down. Now, we still have some tweaking to do, but let's knock off one frame here. So we'll look at 1 through 24, and let's make a play blast out of this. I'm just going to go over here to my play blast options. I'm going to choose image viewer, and I'll show you why. Okay, we'll just make this play blast real quick. There we go. All right. The reason I use an image viewer and not a movie is right up here I can see my frame count. So if I have a problem, I can see it very quickly. All right, still very robotic. I need a little weight to this character. Now let's start working with the graphs, okay? And I like to work on the graphs as we make them. That way we're not stuck with a bajillion graphs to deal with later on. Okay, we know we're building a walk cycle, so we can start to work on this right away. All right, let's start with the hips first, okay? And let's just look at the hips. Let's play this back. All right. So I'll just scrub through slowly. It goes up, goes down. Okay. Still not sold on the movement. It's just doesn't have any weight to it. So let's take a look at our graph here. Let's go ahead and show infinity. And we're going to look at translate Y is what we're going to focus on, this graph right here. All right, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten all the tangents. So I'm just going to select the graph and hit flatten. Now that flattens all of the tangents. Okay, and I'll go ahead and take the first, middle, and last keyframes, and I'm going to shift select this right-hand side tangent handle, and I'm just going to, with my move tool, move these down a little bit. Okay, so they're kind of angled like this. Now, these 2 keyframes here, I'm going to go ahead and shift select those handles and move them up. Okay, I want a nice smooth arc moving between them, just like that. Okay, very good. And now what I'd like to do is take these bottom 2 keyframes, and these are, let's scrub through here. Right here, our first pose, I want the hips to slam down into that position and go back up, okay? Because what we want to do is give the illusion that it has weight. It doesn't ease into the movement, it hits the movement. So to do that, we're going to need to break the tangents, okay? And now we can select each side individually, and we're going to, let me zoom in here so we can concentrate on what we've got here. We want to create kind of a movement where it's coming straight in like this, okay? And then eases back out. So let's go ahead. We may need to adjust the tangents on these guys here. So let's go ahead and pull in. Now that we know what that looks like, kind of angle that down a little bit. So as you can see what this graph looks like, we've got it dropping straight down and back up. So now let's play this back. Okay, and you can really see it right there. Let me actually move to about midway through, and we're going to look for frame 16 right when I get around here. Watch what happens. We come in, and then boom, we hit and we bounce right back up. Okay, so let's play this back. All right, those hips are looking really good now. Okay, so now let's talk about this little curve here that we have. I think it's a rotate Y is what we had animated, the hip control or hip sway. Let's go ahead and select these top 2 curves, keyframes, and flatten those tangents. Okay, so now we'll have nice movement between the hips. Okay, no more jerky movements at the start and the beginning. Okay, let's take each foot, and I'm going to just go through each of these curves one at a time. Okay, now I'm going to come back and work on this translate Y. Actually, I can do it right now. What I'd like to do on this translate Y is add some weight, just like we did earlier. Okay, so what we need to do is have this foot coming in, go up, and then slam back down. Okay, so we'll go ahead and select this keyframe, break the tangents, select this side of the tangent, and pull it up like this. Okay, and we may need to adjust this a little bit. Okay, very nice. So we got it coming in, goes up, and slams back down. Okay, very nice. All right, let's take a look at the raised ball. Okay, we'll just hit F to frame that. And that looks pretty good. I think we got an extra keyframe here at 16. Something doesn't look right there, but we'll come back to that. This one we may want to adjust the graph a little bit, just like that. Okay, that looks good. And we'll frame that. Okay, so we might want to go ahead and flatten these in and outs, just so they come in smooth. Okay, I don't really have to worry about this side. And we can flatten that if you want. Okay. And we're going to come back and tweak these some more, so we're not just stuck with these. I'm going to go back and I'm going to rearrange or retweak some of these. All right, let's talk about this one here. Let's start with translate Y. We want the same kind of movement here. We want it to go up and then slam down. So I'll go ahead and break the tangents on this here. Okay, this is at frame 13, and we're going to lift that up just like that. Okay, so let's play this back. As you can see, if you look at when the foot comes up, okay, right here when the foot comes up, watch what happens as it comes down. It slams and sticks. Okay, come down, stick. Very nice. Okay. Let's take a look at some of these other curves here. We'll go ahead and flatten the raised ball. Okay, flatten the first and the last keyframes. Okay, we're going to tweak this a little bit. Okay, and the way we're going to tweak this, raise toe movement here, is as you see it, as we come along here, okay, and we're looking at the raise right there, it really should be, it starts lifting off too early, I think. Frame 19, around frame 24, that really should be zeroed out. It should be pretty sticky to the ground, as I say. So let's lower that a little bit. Okay, the toe raise. Let's lower that and get that leg straightened out a little bit. So let's say something like 6. Okay, so this is what our graph looks like then. Okay, so let's take a look at our other foot again. Our raise toe value. Frame that curve. And we're going to want to do the same type of thing on this graph. So it's going to be, let's see, here's frame 13. Okay, we're going to go back to frame 12. Actually, frame 13 should have been in the air a little bit. Okay, that looks good. Okay, let's see what this value is, because that value seems a little bit low. Like we didn't match the values correctly. So let's take a look here. Frame 13, I have a raise of 15 on the ball. Okay, let's go back to frame 1, and I have 15, but I also have a ball raise of 30. So maybe we didn't get those transferred over. Right, 30 and 15. And we did not. Raise should have been 30, and this should have been 15. So we kind of goofed on that a little bit, it looks like. And this was a good way to find that, because the graphs didn't look right. There we go. This is looking more like it. Okay, and it looks like we have an extra keyframe right here. We don't need this keyframe, so we can delete that. Frame 19 doesn't need an adjustment, because we have a nice smooth curve right here. Okay, so what I want to do is just like what I did on the previous foot, okay, that we were working with. Let me get that in a position here. See how we added that little keyframe right here, 1 frame before the end of the cycle? We're going to do that to the other side, but it's not going to be at the end of the cycle. Instead, it's going to be end of the midpoint. Okay, so we're going to go to frame 12, and then at this point, we'll go ahead and put 6 in for that toe raise, just like we did earlier. And that's going to tighten up this curve and get rid of some of that floating. And see how this foot sticks now? There we go. And then it starts to roll in. Very nice. All right. Let me go ahead and make a play blast of this real quick before we start tweaking anything else. Let me turn off our NURBS curves, and let me go ahead and go to Window, Play Blast. We'll make that out. All right. I still feel like our hips are a little strong. So let me just select those one more time. Let me just double check that Y. Okay, it was maybe just a little bit too strong. So I'll just kind of bring those down a bit. Okay, and we'll adjust the slopes of all these a little bit more. Just kind of ease them in a little bit. All right, so that's a lot of keyframe adjustments and tweaking. You know, like I said, there's a lot that we can keep working with on these channels here that we have to work with. But for the most part, we've got a really good animation here. As you can see, when it cycles, it looks really good. The character's got weight, it's got a good bounce, and it's a good foundation for us to build our next poses on. All right, so if any of those keyframe tweaks went a little too fast for you, watch the video again. I only worked with the hip sway, and the feet. So, you know, go through them systematically, try to find curves that match up, and you should be squared away pretty well. Now we're going to work on our walk cycle from our front point of view. We want to make sure that our heels or our feet are pointed outwards while the feet are in the air. We're taking that step, and then slightly inward as the foot is passing. So let me show you how this works. Okay, let's kind of angle this to where we can see kind of a front view here. Okay, actually that's a little bit too much. So let's see if we can just get it right in here, like this, and let's scrub this and kind of get squared up here. Okay, so as you can see, we've got this movement happening, but the feet look very robotic. So let's add a little bit of fun to the feet here. All right, so at frame 1, I've got this heel pivot attribute that kind of does this movement here. And what I like to do is kind of angle the foot out a little bit. So again, I'm going to try to use whole values here. So I'll say -8. That looks pretty good. It's got a keyframe already set to have auto key on. All right, I'm going to go ahead and scrub forward. And as soon as it touches the ground, I want to take my heel pivot back a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to take it back to kind of where it was. Not all the way. I want to have a little bit of outward movement. So we'll say -4. Okay, so we go from here to -4. And I want to keep that position, let's say frame 13, all the way to frame 13. I don't want it to twist while I'm walking. Okay, so we just want it to move back. There we go, and it moves back. And then I want it to, by 16, let's move it in the back out a little bit. So let's see. That looks good. I'll just round this off. -7. Okay, so let's take a look here. We got it. The toes are pointed out in this direction. They come in, move back, and now the toes are kind of pointed in towards the heel a little bit. And we want frame 1 to be just like 25. So let me get over here to frame 25. So I can do that very easily by middle clicking, selecting that attribute, and keying it. All right, let's take a look at our graph here. And it's going to be the heel pivot. So we'll just tweak these as we go. Really, the only thing that I need to do is go ahead and flatten these tangents out like this. And those look pretty good, actually. So I'm pretty happy with it. That's really all we needed to do. Let's take a play blast of our feet here and just see what this looks like. See how much different this foot looks? It just looks really good. So, and this one's just not there yet. So let's go ahead and apply the same type of principle to the other foot here. Okay, we'll select it. Okay, so again, we'll try to figure out its movement here. Okay, so we'll start with frame 1. Remember, frame 1 is going to be in its down position. Okay, so frame 1, we'll go to our heel pivot, and we're going to set this to opposite values. So we used negative values over here. We're going to be using positive rotation values over on the left side. All right, so we'll go ahead and set this to 4, okay, just like we did earlier. So frame 1 to 4. Now frame 4, we want that heel pivot pointed in, okay, because it's passing. So I think we used -7, so now it's passing. Okay, to right about frame 13, we're now going to set it to 8, remember? Okay, so we'll drag this over to 8. Okay, and 8 is going to hold until 16. Actually, it's just a few frames. And at 16, we're going to set this back to 4. And we want to hold that 4 until the very end, until we hit here, and that'll be 4 again. Okay, so you have to remember that we've split that in half. First half, and then the second half. All right, let's go ahead and adjust the graphs on that heel pivot. Okay, all we need to do is flatten this tangent. We can also flatten this tangent. Okay, that looks pretty good. So just imagine just like the other curve, except this is shifted over. All right, let's go ahead and turn off our curves here. And let's make another play blast. Very nice. Okay. So at this point, we'll kind of pause there. That's a good stopping point. And in the next lesson, we'll continue on. Now we're going to work on the translate X, or the side-to-side movement of the foot. Now, when you're walking, you don't really walk like the way we have it animated right now. You don't really have your foot out to your hips and you walk like a robot. Even a robot would tip over, because at any point here, your one foot's in the air and your weight hasn't shifted. So what we're going to do is put the foot underneath the body and make that a little bit more of a realistic walk, although trying to keep a little bit of cartooniness to it. All right, so to do this, we need to go into our front view. So I'll just jump over into my front view here, and I'm going to turn off the grid. I don't really need that right now. Okay, so let's take a look at our walk here. What I'd like to do is get that foot in the correct position here. Okay, I'd like to get that foot, we'll start off over here, directly under the body. Okay, kind of like that. So all the weight is going to be under the body. And I want to do 3, but 4 is too much, so we'll do 3.5. Okay, because that looks like it's right there underneath the body. And I'm looking at this heel here. Okay, so we've got this movement happening. We know 1 and the last keyframe need to be the same, so I'll go ahead and put that in. Okay, 3.5. Okay, and now you see, as we move, it floats. So let's fix that issue first. Okay, we're going to be moving along, and up to frame 13, we want to be underneath the foot. So again, 3.5, just like that. Okay, that looks good. And I would say at frame 19, let's set this sucker to 0, just like that. So here it sticks. Frame 19, it steps out. Frame 20, leaning back into the next step. Very nice. Let's go ahead and adjust the graph for this. as we are working. That way we don't have to deal with things later. Okay, we'll go ahead and flatten these tangents. Okay, the first and the last frame, we're just flatten those out. That's all we need to do. Okay, and now we work with this left foot. All right, this is a little trickier. You're going to have to think about it. Instead of zeroing it out at 19, we need to zero it out at frame 7. Okay, so we'll go ahead and just set a keyframe right here on Translate X. So it's going to come out here, out to the side. So what we want is to go ahead and move it back to the same amount. So negative 3.5. Since we used 3.5 on one foot, we're going to use the reciprocal, which would be negative 3.5 here. So let's take a look. It comes out, steps forward, plants. Okay, so at frame 13, we want to take this guy back to negative 3.5. Plants, steps, and see how it's sliding? We don't want that sliding. We want it to stick at negative 3.5. Oops. There we are. Okay, so let's take a quick look at our perspective here. Make sure there is no clipping. Okay, so that's something else that you're going to have to be aware of, is you may have to adjust the graph to ensure there is no clipping, but let's take a look. Nope, that looks really good. Very nice. So let me go ahead and fix the tangents on this left foot here. Okay, we just want to make sure that the first and last keys are nice and flat. And the last key was already flat. I just do it just to make it a habit for you when you're working with this, since we're cycling. And cool, so let's turn off our curves and create a play blast and see how this looks different from before. Very nice. And we haven't done any of our shifting yet of our weight, but this is already starting to add a lot of believability to this walk cycle. Okay, and again, I forgot to take off this last frame, frame 25. That's why we got that little bit of a hiccup right there every time it recycles. But as you can see, having that foot heel pivot, and as well as having the foot Translate X moved in, it really adds quite a bit to how this animation plays out. It's pretty nice. Okay. We'll move on to the next lesson. All right, I have a side-to-side attribute on each of the foot controls, which kind of does a twisting to the foot. Kind of gets the upper toe out higher than the lower toes, littler toes. It's a great look, and it adds a little bit of that extra weight as you're planting in. So let's take a look at this. All right, so in this position here, when we're looking at the foot, let's turn on my control curves here. I have this attribute here called side to side. Okay, and it gives a nice control over kind of the foot twisting out as it gets ready to land and then planting. So let's get this thing cranked up to about 10. Okay, and I've got a keyframe set there. I'll go ahead and set a keyframe at the end to 10. Okay, now the problem is, of course, when it plants, it wouldn't have that twist to it, so we don't want that. Okay, so here, let me just select this again. When we go down and plant at frame 4, I'm going to want to set that to 0. So this side to side needs to be 0. And it needs to hold 0 until it lifts up in the air at about frame 16, let's say. Okay, we'll hold 0. And then from 16 to 25, it's going to go back to 10, the same that it was there, right there. And that's when it picks back up here and plants. Okay, so not a lot of keyframing, really just 4 keys, 10, 0, 0, and 10. All right, let's go ahead and look at our graph, and you can see that there. Okay, we just have these few keyframes here. Okay, and if you wanted to, you could get rid of that keyframe. It's just an extra one. That's on frame 13. When we set all keys for everything, it dropped one in. Okay, we'll just flatten out the first and the last keyframes, no problem, similar to what we've done. Now, the left foot's a little bit trickier, okay, because it's going to start off at 0, and and it's, the majority of it's going to be 0 the first and last half, since that's where it's planted. Okay, so let's start where it's planted first. All right, so we'll go ahead and key this to 0, and it's already keyed. I just want to do it again just to show you. Okay, now at this point, we move forward. This whole time it's in the air. So let's take it to -10. Okay, so it's a reciprocal value. All right, so let's take a look. It goes from 0 to -10, plants. And then right when it hits 16, we need to take this back to 0. Okay, 16, 25 needs the same value, so we'll go ahead and key selected. So it's really simple to set this up. We've got everything at 0, okay, except frame 13, which is at 10. So let's look at the graph. We should just have one little dip. There it is. Okay, and we're just going to flatten these out. There we go. So now those will cycle nicely. Okay, so let's take a look now at our play blast. Go ahead and turn off my curves. Play blast. You notice we do lots of play blast. You want to check your work, and I like that. I really like the way that moves, the way that feels. Again, that's using the side-to-side attribute. Now, we're not going to come back to the feet. We're pretty much done with the feet. We're going to now start working on a little bit of the upper body and some of the bigger movements that are happening to help pull this walk cycle off. Now we're going to add a little bit of forward and backward movement, the rotate X of the upper body. We're going to add a little bit of rotation to the hip control, the back control, the chest, and the head. But then we're going to take it one step further. We're going to offset these curves to create follow-through, okay? And then we're going to add new keyframes. Since we offset the curves, we want to clean everything up so we do have a 25-frame cycle. We don't want to have floating keyframes before and after the animation. All right. So if we look at our upper body, it's very stiff, right? There's no movement to it. So let's go ahead and select all the pieces that we're going to animate. We'll start by selecting the center of gravity control. Okay. Shift select the back control, which is this ring. Shift select the chest control, which is this piece right here. And then shift select the head. Now that's going to gather up all of the nodes that we want to key. Okay. And we're going to set some basic keyframes. So at frame 1 and 25, we want them at 0. And at frame 25, these are going to be at 0. So we'll just go ahead and set a key just in case. Okay. Now at frame 4, we're going to rotate these. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we only want to rotate in X, so we can just pull these forward. Actually, when they're stepping forward, we want to lean back a little bit. And we don't want a whole bunch. So we'll just say -0.5. Okay, so that's at 4. Actually, a little bit -0.5, yeah, at 4. And then I want this same movement at 16, so I'll just select frame 16, and we'll key that. Okay. Lastly, we're going to go to our passing position and animate in the opposite direction. Okay, so we want to lean forward, not a whole bunch, like 0.6 really looks good. I may want to round it down to 0.5. Let me see what 0.5 looks like. 0.5, yeah, I like 0.6 a little bit better. So we'll just stick with 0.6 for frame 10. Okay, and frame 22 is going to be 0.6 as well. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. We've got straight movement, forward, back. Now, it's very subtle, okay, but we're going to exaggerate this. So let's play this. Okay, notice the head moves the same amount as the center of gravity node, and that's not really good follow-through. So let's offset these curves a little bit. All right, with all of those still selected, okay, I got the center of gravity nodes selected. I'm going to select the rotate Y of each of these. Okay, Control-click all of the rotate Y. Okay, very good. And let's frame this. And I can delete this frame 13 key. Okay, I can just delete that. So I end up with this nice smooth curve. And I'll go ahead and select the handles here. And with my move tool, I'll go ahead and adjust the tangents here so they're nice and smooth. Everything is moving nice and smooth and fluid manner. Okay, but what I want to do is offset. Now, I don't want to offset the center of gravity node, okay, since that one, we do want the amount of animation that we animated here. But I'm going to control-click that rotate X to get rid of it. And now I do have the back control, chest control, and the head control still selected. However, they look like just one curve, and that's because they're all stacked one on top of the other. They have the same value. So I'll just select this curve, and holding Shift, I will drag them over one unit, okay, just like that. Now I'll deselect the back control, and now I have the head, chest and head control. I'll go ahead and select those. Hold Shift, click and drag one over, and then I'll deselect the chest control, select this curve, Shift, click and drag. Okay, so now if I was to select all these again, this is what it would look like. The four curves are offset. Now, I haven't gone in and tweaked any of these curves yet because they're looking at the pre and post infinity cycle. So if I play this back now, notice how the head bobs and we have a nice follow through animation. We're still going to increase that a little bit, but let's tweak this first. Okay, and we'll start with each curve. I'm going to go one at a time. Now, the center of gravity is good. We're good to go. If you look at frame 1, we have a keyframe. If you go to frame 25, we have a keyframe. Okay, perfect. Now, if we go to the back control, look what happens. If I go to frame 1, I don't have a keyframe. Instead, I have a free keyframe at frame 2 because I shifted them. Well, that's not good. If we want to cycle this animation later on, if we wanted to make this into a tracks clip, we need to make sure that all of these are nicely cycling from 1 to 25. Okay, and if I go to frame 25, you notice I don't have a keyframe, but I do have one at 26. So how do we fix this? We're just going to choose this button right here, which is Insert Keys Tool. Okay, and I'll come out here and I'll just middle click. I'm sorry, left click. Okay, and I'll go ahead and I'll do this on frame 1 as well. Come over here, just click once. And it looks like it didn't take my... There it is. Did it not take? There we go. I'm sorry, it is middle click. For some reason, it looked like it was selecting it, but it was the tangent handle that I was looking at. Okay, select the curve, middle click. There we go. That looks more like it. All right, so here's what we get. We get this mess. Well, that is an extra keyframe we don't need, so we can throw away the 26 keyframe. And we don't need this keyframe at frame 2. And so what we're left with is 2 keyframes now at frame 1 and 25, and they match up perfectly. The only thing is their tangents are off, so we'll just flatten their tangents and then reselect these guys, and with my move tool, move them into a nice smooth tangency like that. Okay, so I'm going to continue doing that for the rest of the lesson, and then I'm going to scale. So you can fast forward a little bit if you want, if you understand what we're doing here. Okay, so let's go ahead, select this curve, we'll insert a key, middle mouse button, go to the end, middle mouse button, okay, and then we'll go ahead and delete some keys here. We'll throw this one away, throw this extra one away, flatten the first and the last keyframes, and then adjust their tangents to match. Okay, something like that. All right, just got one more left to do. Let me go ahead and plug this in. This will be real easy because that last keyframe is already there. I just need to throw away some keys now. So we'll just toss these out and toss this one out and just verify that these are flat. All right, very good. So now those are done. Now the only thing that I want to do is go back up to my chest control, and I want to scale these a little bit. So I'm going to get my scale tool. I'm going to press Shift and I'm going to click and drag up just a little bit. And now I'm going to go to my chest control, rotate X, and I'm going to scale them up a little bit more than the back control. And then I'm going to scale my head control a little bit more than my chest control. So there we go. We'll rewind this. We'll play. Very nice. And you see we have a nice bit of follow through on the head. Hips, chest, everything is moving nice. And it is a few extra steps to, let me undo this so I can select those again. Here's what the final curves will look like when it's all done and said. Let me select all these, rotate X's. And you see they grow in scale, which is what we want. They are offset nicely, and they all have keyframes at frame 25 and at frame 1. Okay, and that's what you want to end up with. Now we're going to layer on a second layer of animation to our center of gravity node, and that's going to be a translate X. We want to have the hips shift side to side or move the center of gravity over the foot. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this from our front view here. Okay, we'll go ahead and play this. And what we need to do is get the hips to shift a little bit of weight as our character is walking. Okay, so again, we're going to key this at 0 on frame 1, which is already keyed. It's already keyed at 25. And now what we want to do is move into kind of our passing frame here. And that's where we're going to shift the weight a little bit. So we can go over here to our translate X, okay, and we're going to shift the weight. Okay, something like that. Okay, so I know we want to round up, but I think negative 0.8 looks really good here. So if we did it on frame 17, we also need to do that on 19, which will be the reciprocal. So it'll be 0.8, which will be positive. Okay, so now let's take a look. Very nice. Okay, very subtle, very nice. Let's look at the graph for this. Okay, translate X. Let's go ahead and frame this up. And there's a little bit of cleaning up that we can do. We can get rid of that frame 13. There's no need for that. And I do want to flatten out these tangents. I actually want to flatten them all out. So let's do that first. And then this first and last keyframe here, I want to adjust the tangents, just like we did earlier, so we end up with a nice smooth curve on this F curve here. Very good. All right, let's knock a frame off, and let's take a look at our play blast here, see what we end up with. We'll jump over into perspective. Okay, we'll turn off our curves, and let's make a play blast. Let's see what that gives us. All right, very nice. Very happy with that. Okay, let's take a look at it from a front view. Make another play blast. Let's launch that there. All right, very nice. And you can exaggerate that a little bit more if you want. That little hip movement right there. You can exaggerate that a little bit if you want, but I'm pretty happy with it, with the way it is. Now let's add another layer onto this animation by adjusting the hip sway. Now I'm going to adjust the translate X, and then we're going to come back and add a little bit of rotation in Z. Now the whole goal is we want, as we're walking, our hips appear to pop into place. Pop, pop, pop as they're walking. We want that same kind of feel as our character is walking. So let's take a look at what we can do here. All right, we're going to be working with this little hip sway. It looks like a little bone going through his hips here. And a lot of this is going to happen on the down position. Okay, so let's move to frame 4, which is a down position for this character. All right, and we're going to move this hip sway bone in the Z direction. Okay, and the way we want it to work first is we want the hip to move in the direction of the foot that's being planted. Okay, so right now it's the right foot, so we're going to move towards the right. Now we're not talking a whole bunch here. Okay, we're only going to move a little bit, but enough to give it that little bit of movement there. Okay, so this is the down position. I've got it set to negative 0.5. So that means in our other down position, which is 16, okay, I'll middle click, we want to go ahead and set a key for the reciprocal of that, which is positive 0.5. There we go. Okay. So as you can see, it's moving, but it's kind of floating into position. It's not really popping into position. So what we're going to do is about halfway through, okay, on this contact position, on frame 13, okay, which is our big contact position, we're going to move this again in a negative position. Okay, so we used negative 0.5 earlier. I'm going to go a little bit more to like -6 or negative 0.6. Okay, so that's going to help us with our popping. So it holds, pop. See right there how it shifts, pop. And we need to set, since we used -6 on frame 13, which is a contact position, we need to use the reciprocals on frame 1 and 25. Okay, so let me set this back to 25. So we're going to say 0.6 on there and 0.6 on 25. All right, so now let's see what we get. We walk and pop, walk, pop. Very nice. Okay, we need to adjust the graph before we move on to the next piece. So translate X, we'll just frame this up. Okay, we're going to go ahead and flatten the first and last tangents. And I'll select the handles here. And I'm not looking to totally round these out. I'm looking to match this curve profile here. Okay, so that's essentially all I want. So when I come over here and look, it looks like just a repeating pattern. I don't see where the repeat starts and ends. Okay, so maybe just a little bit more. All right, very good. So now we're going to use the same keyframes. Okay, so the 1, 4, 13, 16, and 25. Okay, I want to reuse these keyframes to put in a little bit of rotation. So what I'd like to do is hold down E, right click, actually hold down, let me see, why isn't, well, let me see, here we go. All right, so there's my rotate Z, okay, that's what I want to work with. And we, again, want that popping. So we'll start off in our down positions, okay, so frame 4, which is our down position. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this, and I'm going to point this side of his hip up since that's going down, or since that is the contact foot. Okay, and I'm just going to round that to like -0.4. All right, so if I use -0.4 on frame 4, I need to use +4 on frame 16. Okay. So there's those positions. Okay, and I want that popping. So on this frame 13 contact position, I'm going to set that off just a little bit to like -3. Okay, so watch what happens. It comes into -3, holds, and then pops into position. So as a result, I need to set +3 for my first and last frame. Okay, just make sure that's key selected. All right. Pop, pop. All right, very nice. Let's go ahead and turn off our curves. And we're going to move into these hips here as I make a play blast. So we'll just take a look at our play blast. And you can see here how, and we would probably exaggerate this a little bit more if it was a female. Probably pull the feet in and pull the hips out a little bit. And we do have a bonus lesson planned for this kit at the end of the lessons on how to convert a regular walk cycle into a female walk cycle. So you might want to check that out if you want to learn more about how to tweak that hip node there. So with our hip sway set, and both in the translate X and rotate Z, I think we've got pretty good movement there on the hip. In the next lesson, we'll move on to working with the back and chest and head control, kind of tweaking out the rotate Y of those pieces. Now let's add a little bit of rotation in the Y direction for the back and chest. And what you're going to find is the head is going to start rotating, and we're going to have to counter animate it a little bit. All right, so let's start off with the back control. Okay, we'll go ahead and select the back control, shift select the chest control, which is this control right here. All right, and we'll go to frame 1. And let's rotate this in Y a little bit. Now, this the character's right foot is forward, so we're going to bring the left arm forward, or the left shoulder forward. Okay, so I'll just kind of drag that a little bit. Now, I don't want it too much. Okay, so I'm going to say about -4. So if we put -4 on frame 1, then obviously frame 25 is going to have -4. We'll go ahead and key selected. And frame 13 is going to have +4. Okay, so here's our movement. Okay, and as you can see, it's very additive. So I didn't animate the head, but it's already moving quite a bit. Okay, let's go ahead and tweak the curves for those two objects there. Okay, I'll go ahead and open up the graph editor, and we want rotate Y and rotate Y. We'll go ahead and frame those. Okay. Actually, we'll just select the whole curve and flatten tangents, so we get this nice, smooth curve. But what I'd like to do is on the chest control, which is the upper one here, I want to actually make it a little bit more than 4. So that's where you can edit values in the graph editor right here where it says 4. You can put in 5. You notice it changed the curve. And we'll change these two down here to -5. There we go. So we got quite a bit of movement. All right, next we're going to need to work on the head. Something's not right with it. It's just moving way too much. So let's pull in here a little bit. And I'm actually going to turn on the graph for this, or the grid. Okay, so here's our grid line coming through. And if we play this, his head's just really moving quite a bit. Way too much. More than we actually need. So let's fix that. All right, so we'll start off on frame 1. Let's go ahead and grab this head control. Okay, and rotate Y. And let's kind of animate it back. Let's set it back. That looks pretty good. So we'll stay with 5. Okay, so if we did 5 on frame 1, we need to put 5 on frame 25. Okay, key selected. And then on frame 13, we're going to put -5. Now, what is this going to do? This is going to give us just enough movement on the head so it looks like the head's moving, but not so much that it's really exaggerated. All right, very nice. And if you notice, there is still quite a bit of movement happening. Let me get my rotate here. On that, this piece right here of the geometry. So depending on how your character is rigged, this is just a stand-in object, but you would want to weight this lower body to that hip. That way you do get a nice twist to this. Okay, let's go ahead and check the heads graph while we're at it. And there we go. We do need to get these tweaked out nicely. And all you can do is you don't have to select anything. Just make sure it's selected over here and flatten the tangents. That's all you need to do. It's nice and tweaked out and clean. So let's take a play blast of this now. Play blast. And that's starting to look pretty good. All right. And that gets us ready for the next lesson. Let's turn our curves back on. And we'll stop here. All right, now we're going to take a look at the rotate Z of the chest control. We're going to add a little more rotation to the upper body. And what we're going to do is if the right foot is forward, we want the left shoulder to raise up and the right shoulder to dip down.
All right, so let's go ahead and select the chest control here. Now this is all going to happen on the down positions, which is going to be frames 4 and 16, which are the down positions. Okay, so we already have 0 set in here at frame 1, so we don't have to worry about that. So let's go to frame 4 here, and we'll just activate the rotate Z. And let's see here. We want the left shoulder to go up. We want to point this in the direction of the planted leg here, which is the right leg. And 5 is a little bit too much, so let's see. Let me just crank this down to about 0.3, or I'm sorry, 3.0. All right, so there's a nice movement. Let's now go to frame 16. If we used 3 on frame 4, we need to use -3 on 16. And we want this to pop, okay? So right now, our frame 1 and 25 are 0. And just like we did with the hips, we're going to need to increase that a little bit. But I'm not going to set keys here. I want to show you a different trick. Let's go ahead and open up the graph editor. Rotate Z. I'll go ahead and frame this. And as you can see, our curve doesn't look smooth. Okay, so let's go ahead and flatten this. Our curve doesn't look smooth. Okay, we can actually delete frame 13. We don't need that frame in there. And if we were to repeat this over and over, something doesn't look right. Well, it's mainly because the first and the last keyframe are not high enough. Okay, we need to raise these up. So let me get my move tool. And I'm going to raise these to somewhere around 2. Okay, I'll just raise this to 2. And I'm using 2 as just, that's just a number I just picked, just a whole number. That way we can adjust these tangents to match. Okay, so I'm going to smooth out these tangents just like we did earlier. And now take a look. See, our repeating graph looks nice and smooth. Okay, and we could have done that by hand. We could have just went in. We knew this value was 3, so we could have come back and added 2 or 1.5 or something in here to kind of match this slope. All right, let's take a look at this. Very nice. And you can see that the shoulders are going up and down, up and down. We've got a nice bit of movement. Now, I want to add another layer of movement to the head, okay? And this is going to be in the rotate Z as well, okay? So I'll show you here. I'm going to add some of this movement side to side. And again, we're going to use this not on the down position, but on the passing position, which is frames 7 and 19. So let's cruise over here to frame 7, okay? And I'm going to rotate this in Z. Okay, so again, if this right leg is down, okay, as you can see, it is down. The left is passing. I'm going to go ahead and tilt the head, okay, towards the right-hand side. So let's just set this to 5. All right, so if I use 5 on frame 7, I need to use -5 on frame 19. Oops, -5. There we go. Okay, and as you can see here, we've got this kind of bobbing movement, and we don't really want that bobbing movement. We want it to snap. So we'll go to frame 13, and let's say -4, or I'm sorry, 4 to snap. Just like what we did, right? We went 1 unit past. Okay, so here we go. Boom. And we need to set 1 and 25 as well. We used 4 at 13, so let's use -4. And what will happen is, as you get used to this, you're going to see the patterns that are happening. It's the same pattern being used over and over. All right, let's take a look at the graph of this guy. Okay, rotate Z. Let's frame this in. Let's go ahead and flatten the whole thing. And let's see what we have to work with here. All right, let's go ahead and smooth out the tangents here. Okay, that looks pretty good. I think this is the only one that's kind of an oddball, so let me smooth that a little bit. And there we go. Our repeating or our infinite cycle here looks nice and smooth. There's not really any jerks in there. So let's take a look at this. And this is with the head movement and shoulder movement. Very nice. Okay, it's got a nice level of movement. Again, you can exaggerate any of this depending on your character. All right, very happy with that. Now let's move on to the arms. And one of the first things we're going to do is pull the arms down to the sides of the body, and you can determine, where the good fit is there. And then we'll go ahead and set some initial keyframes. Just like we did with the legs, we're going to start with big movement, and we're going to dial it in to where we get finer and finer movement. Okay, so the first thing that I'd like to do is get this arm moved down. So I'm going to select this shoulder control, which is this large FK control right here. Okay, and let's go ahead and move this into position. Okay, and don't want to go too much. About -78 looks like. We're going to just round that up a little bit. Okay, and we can also put in a +78, the reciprocal there. Okay, that's a good start position. So let's go ahead and middle mouse button over to frame 25. Okay, and I'll go ahead and select both of those, and we'll key selected. There we go. So we should see, oops, we do see at frame 13. I bet we have some animation. Yep. We accidentally put in a keyframe there. So I'm going to just right click and choose delete, and that will yank off that frame 13 keyframe. There we go. So if you're getting any kind of weird movement, you might check frame 13. I think we may have added a keyframe for all attributes on there instead of specifically just the ones we animated. All right, so now our arms are not moving, so let's work on some side-to-side movement here. Now, if the right foot is forward, we're going to cock this right arm forward. Okay, and that's going to be the rotate Y values. So I'm going to jump over to my side view here just so I can see this. Okay, and I got my grid on, and you can adjust the grid values if you'd like. Okay, so let me go ahead and adjust this rotate Y. So it's just past his elbow is just past his front hip there. Okay, I'll round that down a little bit. Okay, -27. So if it's frame 1 is -27, then we know frame 25 is going to be -27. Okay, and we know that frame 13 is going to be +27. But what I like to do to add a little bit of that extra follow through is to cock it back just a little bit more. Let's go a couple units more. So let's say 29. Now, let's play this. All right, very nice. I like that. Let's go ahead and jump over to the other side. And if we remember our values, we can go in here and say, okay, I liked that. That was 29 to start off with. Actually, -29. We're going to do negative values. Okay. We middle click, drag and drop, or drag to 25. All right, we'll go ahead and key that. And at frame 13, it was at +27. Okay, there we go. So let's play this back here and see what we got. Okay, pretty nice. All right, let's take a look at our graphs now. So let's open up our graph editor. Okay, rotate Y. We'll go ahead and frame this. We just need to flatten that tangent. Okay, we're going to do the same over on the right side. And we'll go ahead and flatten that tangent. And that's really all we need to do to getting the arm in the initial start position. Now, again, we're going to move to the elbows next, but this is a good place for us to kind of stop and say, okay, let's play blast this and see what we have. So let's turn off. Another little Mel script you can write is just something that turns off the curves and then makes a play blast and then turns them back on. So you could make a little script like that. Nice. Okay, I want to look at a play blast from the side. Very nice. Okay, happy with that. I haven't got the elbow or wrist movements in, but once we get that, boy, this is going to look really good. So we've got the curves back on, and we're ready for the elbow movement next. Now we're going to animate the elbow movement, and this is a perfect opportunity for us to layer in a little bit of follow through. Okay, so what we're going to do is work on one of the elbows first. Okay, we'll start with, let's say, the right elbow, and we'll figure out its movement. Okay, how is it going to flow or animate based off of the shoulders movement or the upper arm movement. Now these keyframes I'm going to tell you are going to happen on the passing frame. And the passing frames are, to remind you, is frame 7 and 19. Okay, so let's take a look at our animation and kind of dissect this a little bit. So as we come into frame 7, we should actually have this elbow moved back a little bit. Okay, so we're going to move this elbow back a little bit. Okay, and I'll just get my rotate Y. It's the only attribute available. And we're just going to rotate this back a little bit. So like, I'll round that down to 0.8. Okay, so we almost have a straight elbow. So let's see what this looks like coming in. Okay, straight. And then there's a keyframe here on frame 13. I'm going to right click and delete that keyframe. We don't need that keyframe. Okay, so frame 7. And then as we get to 19, you notice the arm is moving back. Well, at 19, the elbow really should be like way out here, okay? Because it still hasn't had a chance to catch on and move backwards yet. So that position looks very nice. We'll go ahead and round that to 35. All right, let's go ahead and play this. Okay, now the first and last keyframes don't look right because they're zeroed out. So let's take a look at the curve. We could just type in a value, but let's start to analyze the curve itself. And remember earlier when we were looking at the infinity curve here, it didn't look right. We're in the same kind of situation here. So let's flatten everything out. Okay, and we'll select this first and last keyframe here. And with my move tool, I'm going to just move these up a little bit. Okay, and I'm looking for a point where this point is going to come smoothly into this point. Okay, and it looks like, let me just round this to 12 and see what happens. Okay, actually it looks like that's going to be okay. So I'll just move these tangent handles so they're smooth just like before. And if you look, we've got this nice smooth curve happening. Okay, let's go ahead and play this, see what we get. So here's our frame 1. And you see there's a little bit of follow through there. And then follow through there. And again, it connects here and is ready to do the next movement. So I think it adds a lot of movement to the character. That little bit of follow through. As opposed to this side. See how mechanical that looks? All right, so let's go ahead and apply these values. Once you get one side done, the other side's super easy, right? Because it's just going to be the negative values. So we know 1 was 12. We set it to 12, so we'll say negative 12 here. Okay, we know 25 is going to be negative 12. Now frame 13, I don't know why, but we can delete that keyframe. We don't need that keyframe in frame 13. But we do need one at 7. Okay, and if you remember, we used, in this position, it was negative 35. We used 35 on the other side. All right, and on 19, we used, I believe, 8. Let's try that, see if that looks right. Yep, very good. And with that selected, let's go back and get it. Let's go back to our graph. Rotate Y. Let's frame this. Okay, let's go ahead and flatten all the tangents. And then we're going to grab these handles and just smooth out this curve. Okay, now it's just perfect. It's going to work great. All right, if you want, I'm not going to, because that's a follow-through lesson, I'm not going to do the same on the hands, but you would do the exact same movement on the hands. And I'll do one just so you can see kind of the pattern here. Okay, so we're going to go to frame 7. Okay, And let's curl in the fingers here. Index, mid, and pinky. Curl those in. Thumb roll, we'll go ahead and bring that in. Thumb bend, we'll bring that in. Okay. And frame 13, again, got those crazy crazy movements there. So let's see. Here's the extreme. Okay, so frame 13 contact position. I want to actually go on to frame 19. Okay. And again, we're going to add some pinky bend, thumb roll, thumb root bend. Okay, pull that in a little bit. And you can adjust some of these values a little bit more. Okay, and I'm going to go to frame 13, and I'm going to just relax these just a little bit. And what I'm doing is just adding a little bit of random movement to this, okay, and a little bit of follow through. So I don't have frame 1 done yet, okay, but as you see, I move into position, I relax, I tighten back up, and it looks like we're very, very loose here. So let's set some keyframes for the first and last keyframe here. So I'll go ahead and add a little bit of thumb bend. We'll go ahead and pull in the pinky, pull in the index, like that. Okay, and then we'll just middle click. Let's get all these attributes keyed. Take these two and key that. Okay, so let's see what we get. Okay, frame 19, I want to straighten out those fingers a little bit. Like that. Okay, and it should automatically key. So let's take a look. Nice follow through, bend, and back to where we started. Okay, if you want, you can open up the graph editor, and for all those that we keyed right here, let's go ahead and fit those keyframes. We want to take the first and the last keyframes and flatten those tangents so they blend in nicely. Like I said, I'm only going to do one side. Okay, on the other side, I'm just going to take it and curl in the fingers a little bit. And roll our thumb in. Okay, so I'll just middle click and key all those. And go to the last frame, key all those. Or I could get rid of all the middle keys. So here we go. Nothing fancy happening there. Okay, but you do have something happening on this side. All right, very nice. Let's take a play blast of this. And take a look at our work. All right, very good. Now we still have a lot of work to do on the upper arms, so we'll stop here and move on to the next lesson. All right, now let's add a layer of follow through to the wrist because we got the shoulder moving, then we got the elbow following behind it, and we want the wrist to follow behind the elbow. All right, this animation or this pose is going to happen at frame 9 and frame 21. Okay, so we've got some movement happening here. Okay, so we'll go to frame 9, and what we want to do is have the wrist angled back, okay, because it's coming from the back, moving forward. So really right here, the wrist should be pointed back. So let's get the rotate Y here. It should be pointed back like that. Now, that's pretty extreme, so let me dial that back a little bit. Something like that, 0.5, that looks really good. It's not straight, it is angled back, okay? And then we'll go to frame 21, and look how much the elbow is bent. So we're going to want to move this wrist forward quite a bit. All right, and let me just dial that down a little bit to about, okay, we'll just take that 0.2 off and say 31. Okay, so we're at -5, 31, okay. 13 doesn't need to be there for that keyframe. So we'll delete that when we go into our graph editor. Now something still doesn't look right. Let's play this. And that's because frame 1 and 25 are 0, and that's not what we want. So let's go into our graph editor, rotate Y, and as you can see, our cycling curve does not look smooth and cycling. So we're going to do the same trick that we did earlier. Okay, we're just going to move these guys up a little bit. And find kind of that happy spot. Okay, and I'm actually going to delete frame 13's animation here, because that's affecting how this curve looks here. All right, so if you look here, we're starting to get a nice smooth curve. So I'm going to set this to 12, because that looks pretty nice. And I'm going to flatten this whole curve. So that way, when I adjust the tangents here, like that, just like we did earlier, these are spaced nice and even. And I'm not for sure why I have a keyframe on 26. It should be moved back one. Here we go. And that should be on frame 1. I must have been off a little bit when I moved these. So let's readjust these tangents here. I'll select those. Okay, 9, 21. That's flat. That's flat. Let's just double check. There we go. Okay. Nice. And we pulled in on that shot right there at the wrist. So if we look, the wrist pulls. Very nice. Okay. So doing this, the left side, it's just as easy. You just got to go in and put the reciprocal values, except the first and the last frame. Okay, so we'll come back and do those frames. So we'll go to frame 9, and the rotate Y, if you remember, was positive 31. So I'm going to put in negative 31. There we go. So that's frame 9. Frame 21, I believe we used negative 5, so I'll say 5. Yeah, that looks about right. And let's take a look at our graph. Okay, so our last keyframe, first, actually, let's go ahead and flatten this whole thing. And it looks kind of like a mess, but let's move these points down a little bit. And it looks like we don't really need to move them that much. We're just looking to smooth out this curve a little bit. Let's get rid of frame 13. That crazy keyframe's throwing everything off. Okay, and it looks like if I round this to negative 4, we might get pretty close. Oops. We just need the first and last keyframe. Negative 4, let's try. There we go. That looks pretty close. All right, 3.5 may do it a little bit better, but I want to round these, so let's just see what happens here. Okay, that's okay. That'll work. All right, that curve looks just like the other one. So let's play this back. Awesome. All right, and let's go ahead and turn off our curves. And let's make a play blast, because I think we're getting really close here. We're going to work on the scapulas next and get the actual elbow kicking side to side, so that'll look really cool. Okay, let's take a look at it from this view. Nice. Let's exaggerate that elbow movement next. Now we're going to rotate in Z the scapulas, and these are going to run 2 frames after the passing frame. So again, frame 9 and 21. And we want them to be animated counterclockwise to the movement. All right, so let's go ahead and scrub through this a little bit. And we see as we get to about frame 9, okay, we're going to grab this shoulder control up here, okay, the scapula control. And we're going to grab the rotate Z. And let's see what we're going to get here. Okay, I'm going to pull this out a little bit. Right at the shoulder. And I'm looking, I want to pull it out, but I don't want to pull it out too much. Okay, I'm going to round this down to negative 6. Okay. And then we're going to go 2 frames after the passing, which is going to be frame 21. All right, same thing, except this time I want to crank it behind the body just a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to round that to 3. So it looks like it's pushing in right in there on the body. All right, now I don't know what my first and last frames need to be, so I'm going to do that trick like I showed you earlier. We'll go ahead and load up the graph editor, rotate Z, frame these up, and I need to get rid of that frame 13, so I'll just trash that. All right, let's go ahead and flatten this curve. And we're not that far off, I don't think. I think we're okay with this. I'm just going to adjust the tangent handles, and I think we're going to be okay. Yeah, that looks really good. So as you can see, when I look at my infinite curve, it may be hard to see the absolute curve repeating smoothly, but you can see here my infinite curve repeats just fine. So we're good to go here. All right, so we used -6 and 3. So let's put this on the other scapula here. All right, we'll go over to frame 9. All right, and we'll choose -3 instead of the -6. So we'll say -3. Okay. We'll go to 21. And we'll say, okay, we need to move in +6 since we went -3 on the other one. So we'll say 6. Perfect. And let's get rid of this frame 13, which is kind of a no-brainer there. And let's flatten this out. So obviously, these are not in the first and last keyframes are not in the right position in this setup. So let's go ahead and let's move them up into a position that we're like, okay, this could be something usable. All right, so let's try to round this to 4 and see what happens. I think that's going to work. Okay, so we're just smooth out that curve there. All right, let's play this back. Very nice. All right, I'm going to just scrub it just to verify that we're not getting any clipping. Okay, I'm getting a little bit of clipping there, which we can just fix this wrist just by rotating that a little bit, but I'm not going to worry about just that little bit of clipping yet. A lot of times when you're animating, it's really the illusion. You know, if you're in this position, you will never see that clipping. So it really, you know, analyze where the camera is going to be and animate to the shot. Okay, so that's pretty good. Let's take a quick play blast with that scapula movement in there now. All right, I like the way that looks. All right, we're going to layer one more piece of animation on this to kind of drive this movement home. All right, now we're going to work on the rotate X of the arms and the rotate Z of the wrists. When we rotate the arms, so as you're walking, the wrist kind of moves in, the elbow moves out as you're passing through. That animation is going to drive the fingers into our hip. So then we're going to have to kind of counter animate the wrist. Now, all of this depends on the type of character you're working with. If you've got a humanoid character, you probably won't even have this issue, but since we have this blocky cartoon character, we have this issue, so we need to address it. All right, first of all, let's go ahead and add the rotate X of the arms. Okay, and we're going to be working with this shoulder FK control here on each arm. All right, we'll start with the right arm. And this is going to happen, this animation is going to happen at the passing frames, which is frame 7 and frames 19. Again, we do have some animation on frame 13, which we're going to have to get rid of. So let's talk about frame 7 here. Kind of what's happening. Well, at frame 7, we want to rotate this in a little bit. So let me get my rotate tool. And we're going to rotate in X, kind of in this direction. So about, let's see, something that looks pretty good. Okay, looks pretty good. You can see the inside of the forearm is what would be visible. Let's round this down to -11. So 7, and then at 19, Okay, we're going to rotate this in the other direction. So we're going to rotate it inward. And it's going to go quite a bit. So it's going to look like a bit much, about 20, let's say. Okay, let's look at the graph editor here because we automatically had our first and last keyframe created for us. And it looks like I don't have a keyframe on frame 13, so that's nice. What I need to do is, let's flatten this whole curve. We need to take a look at first and last keyframe. This is not going to make a smooth curve, so we need to make some adjustments on this. So let's maybe move these up a little bit. Okay, and I bet that's going to make a nice curve. So let's see if we can just make the curve, and then we'll decide if we need to round up or down. All right, that's going to do it. So I'm going to round this to 5. All right, that looks really good. Okay, let me just pull these just a bit more. Okay. So we got the wrist, or the shoulder rotate done. Let's take a look at what this looks like. All right, this is causing some interpenetration of the fingers into the leg and hip. So we're going to do some counter animation on that, but that's okay. Let's get this other arm done. Now we do have the numbers for that. It was 11, 20, and 5. So let's go ahead and plug those numbers in. The first keyframe on this is going to be 5 because we're going to use similar values as we did earlier. Okay, the last keyframe is going to be 5. So we'll just key select that. Let's see, 7. We earlier used -11, so at this point it will be 20. Okay, and 19, it will be, I believe, 20. Actually, no, -11, because it's behind. Okay, perfect. Let's double check the graph. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's just go ahead. Let's first flatten the tangents. And then let's smooth out this curve. Okay. So now let's take a look at the wrist here. We've got some issues that we've got to deal with, and that's this interpenetration. Now, of course, you could flatten out the fingers, but let's just rotate the wrists. I think that's going to be an easier solution in the long run. We just rotate the Z on the wrists, and that let's double check that is the right. Yeah, we'll just do a rotate Z, and we should be good to go. So this will be on frame 7. Okay. And we'll start with the right wrist. So frame 7, let's go ahead and rotate this out here. Let's see. It's behind his hip. So we'll just do 15. That looks good. And you're going to learn to train your eye to eyeball a lot of these values. Okay. Now, we're going to move forward, so we're going to go to about frame 15. And we want to get this in a negative rotate Z. So let's pull this out. And hopefully we can pull it out. Let's try -25. Hopefully we can pull this out far enough out so then we don't see it when it passes. Okay? So let's see, value 1. We don't know what our 1 and last keyframes are, so let's check our graph editor. All right, there's our malicious frame 13. We'll go ahead and kill that. And that is not making a very smooth curve. So let's just see what happens if I move these down a little bit. Comes in and holds. Okay, let's try that. -19. There we go. And we'll flatten that out. And I'm just going to adjust the curve so we have a little bit of smoothness. Just like that. Okay, let's take a look at this. All right, just a little bit of clipping there. I think I can fix that on the thumb. All right, pretty good. So let's add that to this wrist. And we know what the values are, which is kind of cool. So let's see, rotate Z, if I remember this, it's going to be 19 at the first and last keyframes. Okay, we'll just go ahead and key that. And then, let's see, we moved to frame 9, and I believe we had it set to negative 25, so we'll say 25. Okay, and again, we're going to have to fix the thumb. And let's see, we moved to about frame 15 and added a negative 15 because we went positive in the other arm, or other wrist. All right, let's take a look at the graph editor here. Let's kill that frame. Okay, we'll flatten all the tangents. And let's just double check these, make sure they're kind of smooth coming in. So it looks just like the opposite of the previous one that we created. So if we look at this guy, it's pointing up like this. And if we look at this one, it's pointing down. Okay, no different. All right, and we'd probably need to fix the thumb on that. There's a little bit of penetration right there. All right, let's see if we can maybe fix that by adjusting the scapula a little bit in the next lesson. All right, next we're going to finish out this cycle, this walk cycle, by rotating the scapulas in the Y direction. This is going to add just that little bit of extra weight movement as our character is walking along here. All right, let's take a look at our scapula. And this needs to happen at our contact positions. So frame 1, 13, and 25. Okay, and when the arm is back like this, we want to rotate in Y, the scapula back. Okay, so it's being pulled back like this. And maybe not that much. We don't want it to, cram into the arm or into the body. So let's say about negative 5. Okay, we'll just round that down. So we know 1, we know that 25 needs to be negative 5. Okay, and then we'll go to frame 13, and let's try to find some place here that looks pretty good as it's moved forward. Okay, that looks pretty good. About, we'll say 13. Let's see what happens there. All right. And that helps with that inner penetration. There we go. Looks good. He's got kind of a hipness to his step there. Hip to his step. All right, I like that. Let's go ahead and add the same values to the other side, except they're going to be the negative and opposite values there that we've used. So we know that the 5 was what we set for 1 and 25, and 12 was what we set for 13. So we're just going to reverse those. We'll say negative 12 for the first and last keyframes. Okay, and then midpoint will be a positive 5 since we used negative 5 earlier. All right, very cool. All right, let's turn everything off here. Get our character posed up here into a spot where we can see him. And let's create a play blast. All right, this animation now is a complete cycle, 1 through 25 frames. You can use this with the tracks kit. You can add to this. This is going to be the foundation of a number of kits that we've got coming out, as well as a number of new features that we've got coming out on our website. I want to thank Delano Athias for his great work on the animation of this little guy and all the R&D that he spent putting this into it. He's an incredible animator, and we're lucky to have him on staff. I apologize for losing my voice over the course of this kit. I started with a lot of energy in my voice, and now I'm barely hanging on. I still have 2 more bonus lessons for you, which will add a great deal to just a basic walk cycle. But I know this is addressing a lot of issues that a lot of customers have asked for, which was, give me the basics of a good walk cycle. I want it to cycle over and over and over. I want them to be like on a treadmill. And as you can see here, I think we've done a pretty good job of addressing not only graphing issues, but just how you layer the animation and not just go do this, 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 and this, and you have a walk cycle. I hope you can apply these principles to your own animations. And again, thank you very much for being a part of our very unique training process. We'll see you in the next animation kit. All right, now that you've built your walk cycle, let's talk about how to translate it forward in your workspace. Now, we talk about this process in our Maya Tracks training kit, but I want to talk to you about how to just take this simple walk cycle and translate it forward. All right, so we'll be working with this master control here. Now, let's go ahead and jump over to the side view. And actually, I'm going to open up my perspective side view and change this over to side. And we're really only going to focus on the first 4 frames. And what we need to do is imagine, where would this character be walking if he had moved forward during this down phase. So let's set a keyframe for the translate Z of this character. So we'll just go in here, key selected. Excuse me. And then I'm also going to key selected at frame 25. So I should have 2 keyframes. All right. And this graph, actually, I want to do a curves post-infinity cycle with offset. Okay, so what I want to have is a linear curve that as I move this forward, it just goes more and more forward. All right. So where would this character be at frame 4 in the workspace? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this point up, okay, and I'm going to hold shift. And I'm going to move my character forward. So I would say, I'm going to put the heel in about the grid point here. Okay, let's just see what this looks like. Okay, not enough. You see how the foot is sliding? We don't want that. Okay, so that foot sliding we don't want. So let's go back to frame 4 and let's, holding down shift as I middle click and drag, I'm going to bring this down a little bit. So I'm around the 100 range. All right, very good. As I can see here, 102.384 is pretty good. I want to tweak it a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to pull in tight on both of these as I click and drag. That's not too bad, actually. Let me see what happens if I move this up a little bit more. All right, so I'm going to say let's just round this to 100.3. 100.2 and change worked out pretty good as well. So anything I think in that region is going to work well. And let's say we had 100 frames. This thing is going to cycle beautifully. Okay, let's turn off our control curves. And I'll turn off my grid. There we go, guys. That's how you would translate this forward if you're not using tracks. In this final bonus lesson, I'm going to teach you how to transform the male walk into a female walk. And that's going to require us to tweak 4 areas: the arms, the hip sway, the knees, and the feet. Bear with me. I think I'm losing my voice on this last lesson. So hopefully we'll push through and get this thing wrapped up. All right, so you're going to want to open up bonus lesson 2, which has our walk cycle, okay, but it also has a extra piece of geometry. If we can turn off the character Animo and open up the female version, Annie, there we go. And it has a little bit more of a female type proportions to the model. Okay, and if we look at this walk cycle now, it just doesn't look right. All right, so let's start first by analyzing the arms. What I'd like to do is take a look at the graph, and actually I'm going to split it like this. And we'll open up the right arm here. I'll go to rotate X, and we'll just frame that in. Let's go ahead and view infinity. All right, so that looks nice and smooth. Okay, this curve looks nice and smooth. But I want to adjust the passing frames, which are 7 and 19. So at 7, I have it currently set to -11, and I want to go quite a bit more. So I'm going to crank that back a little bit, quite a bit. I want to see the inside of the arm. So let's see if I can get this about. It looks really good. About, let's say 37. So -37 there. Okay, and we're going to go forward to the next passing frame, which is 19, and let's crank that over. Okay, and we don't want to go completely reciprocal values. I think 26 looks really good. All right, now you can see our curve is no longer smooth. So let's tweak these points now. Now with my move tool, I'll just hold shift as I drag. And I'm looking for this curve to get smooth. So I'm going to round this to 0, see what happens. Okay, we'll go ahead and select these handles. All right. That looks nice and smooth. So let's play this and see what we get. Very nice. Okay, so let's apply this to the other arm. And we're going to just use the opposite values there. So frame 7, we'll make this 26. Okay. Frame 19, it was 11. I'm going to crank that over to -37. And the first and last frame, I think we'll be able to set this to 0, just like we did the earlier ones. But we need to flatten these. And then I can go in and adjust these tangents. Oops. Reselect those. Okay, so now this matches the right hand side. So let's play this back. All right, very cool. Next, let's take a look at the hip sway. For the hip sways to look correctly, we're going to work on the down and contact positions. Now first we'll start with the translate X. We're just going to move the hips side to side like this. All right, again, let's open up the graph editor and see what we have. So I'll get my translate X, frame that in. All right, this graph looks like this. If you remember earlier, we wanted the hips to pop into place. So let's focus on our down positions first, and that's frame 4. Okay, and we're just looking at the hips here. Let's go ahead and move this a little bit more. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, so 4 and 16 are our 2 down positions. Okay, and I used -0.9 there. So over here, I'll say +0.9. There we go. And now I need to worry about my contact positions. So my first and last frame. So let's get these, let's just set this to 1. That way they pop into position. So first frame, last frame pops. Okay, that looks really good. 13, we'll put in -1. That way it's a reciprocal. Okay, and let's flatten all these tangents and then smooth things out a little bit. So the first and last frame, we'll take these handles and just pull them down a little bit. We'll take this one and smooth that. Smooth and smooth. Okay, so it looks just like it did earlier, but it's just exaggerated. Now you could, if you want, just scale these. So that's an option you have available as well. Okay, let's take a look at what that looks like. Nice. Now let's add a little bit of that rotation or exaggerate that rotation. So let me frame this in. We have a similar type of curve because again we want it to pop, pop, pop into place. Let's just see what happens if we scale this. So I'll press R on my keyboard and holding shift, I'm just going to exaggerate this out. Maybe a little bit more. Very nice. So just by exaggerating this out, and I'll tell you, the first one's at 4. I'm going to take this a little bit further. Let's go something like that. Okay. Again, you may want to go in and just double check that these curves are all kind of nice. Let me get my move tool there. Nice and smooth. We don't want any extra peaks or valleys. And let's see what our values here are. I'm going to just round off the first and the last frame to 6. And my frame 13, I'm going to take that to -6. That's why it's a nice even reciprocal here. And what do we have here? 8. I'll just round that off. And this one I'll set in -8. So really what I'm doing is just I used my scale to approximate how I wanted this to look. But then I went in and I rounded them off just so I end up with whole numbers. Next, let's take a look at the feet. And in our scene here, we can take a look. Let's just move into the front view. Okay, so as I'm moving through right here, you notice the foot goes way out. Well, it doesn't quite match her hips correctly, and her foot would be quite a bit closer in. So let's go ahead and set a keyframe here of where this foot needs to be. And that's really easy to do. We'll just go ahead, go to frame 16, looks like. Select her foot control, and we'll just move that in to like, I'll stick with a whole number here, 3. Okay, so let's play this. And it looks like 19. Actually, that's happening from our heel rotation. So let's fix that to our heel pivot. Let me go to our heel pivot. Let's crank it over. It's a little bit too much. Let's bring it in this way. There we go. Now we're starting to get that heel in. Okay. I'm not going to round that off. If I want to, I can round it to 1.5. Just so it's even. Okay. Let's take a look at that graph. Find out what's going on here. Okay. Got it moving in, and I think this is an extra keyframe here that we don't need on 18. So I'll go ahead and delete that keyframe. Frame this again. And let's see what this looks like. Nice. So you can see she's keeping her footsteps tighter into the center line. All right, let's do that for the other foot, the left foot. Frame that. Okay, yeah, we did have an extra keyframe there, so that worked out pretty good. This is going to be on frame 7, okay? And we used +3, so we'll just move this over -3. And our heel pivot, excuse me, we used -0.14 or 1.5, so we'll say 1.5 and see where that gets us. All right, I like that. All right, now if you wanted to, we could exaggerate all of these other keyframes as well. So let's see what that looks like if we were to pull this foot in a little bit more. That looks good. So I set that to 4. I'll set the rest of these to 4 as well, -4. Let me play this. Nice. Okay, I'll do that with the other foot as well. Go ahead and select that. And this will be +4. Okay, very good. Finally, we're going to tweak the knees, and the knees are really easy to tweak. Okay, we'll just select the knee control here, and I'm going to move it over. Okay, we're not going to go too much. About midpoint, I'll round that to 5. And I want to put that same keyframe on 13. Okay, we'll key selected. And the same keyframe on 25, key selected. Now what I'll need to do is right where this foot's coming up, I'm going to, that looks like frame 16. I'm going to go ahead and pull the knee in. Okay, and see about, That looks good. We'll just leave it at 8. I was going to say 8.5, but 8 looks really good. All right, so let's take a look at that knee movement. Very subtle, okay? And let's just check this graph. We'll go ahead and flatten the tangents. That way it loops nicely. And let's do the other knee. Okay, we'll go in. And let's see, what values did we use on this foot? We used 5, so we'll use -5 on this foot. So we'll just say -5. Just move it over. Okay, we'll go to 13. Set a key. Go to 25. Set a key. And we need to find out where its high position is, which looks like it's going to be about frame 4. We'll go ahead and move this knee over. I believe it was -8 is what we want. Okay, so now let's take a look at our animation. We'll turn off our curves. And those are just a couple of tweaks that we made. And it's much different than our previous walk cycle. So hopefully you've seen how to modify once you've got an animation in. You can, of course, turn this into a run very quickly. You can pump the arms and get an action going there. On the female, you can put a little more pep in her step. So I apologize for losing my voice during this training kit, but I thank you for sticking with us. And hopefully you got a great deal of information from this training kit. Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll see you in the next training kit.